Some insults don't just bruise the ego, they desecrate the dead. When 20-year-old Emily mocks her mother's heirloom dress to score points with her friends, she learns that in this Georgian house, tradition has teeth, and some lessons are taught with wood, not words. Asterisk. The rain in Bath does not fall. It descends. It is a curtain of liquid pewter that turns the Georgian limestone of the city into a weeping wall of history. It had been falling since dawn, a soft, persistent drizzle that transformed the cobbled streets into mirrors, reflecting the gray sky and the premature amber glow of the street lamps dot inside Eliza Harrington's townhouse. The atmosphere was hermetically sealed against the damp. The air was thick, curated, smelling of Earl Grey tea, cinnamon sticks, and the faint melancholic trace of lavender sachets tucked between layers of wool in a mahogany wardrobe. It was the scent of old money, or perhaps money that had long since evaporated, but left its manners behind. Emily stood by the bay window of the drawing room, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the rain drown the garden. She was 20 years old, a creature of the modern age, trapped in a period drama she hadn't auditioned for. She adjusted the hem of her black-aligned dress. It was a stunning piece of clothing, short, severe, expensive. The kind of dress that cost more than her mother's monthly grocery bill and was designed to be worn in places with loud bass and low lights. Not here, amongst the doilies and the silence. She had spent an hour on her makeup. Her eyes were smoky, rimmed with precision liner. Her lips were matte mauve. Her hair was swept into a ponytail so sleek it pulled at her temples. She tapped her ankle boots against the original hardwood floor, a staccato rhythm of impatience. "Honestly, Mom," Emily said, turning from the window. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the muffled quiet of the room. "Why do you insist on this? It's not 1998 anymore. You're not a character in Downton Abbey. Nobody does high tea on a Tuesday." Eliza didn't look up immediately. She was standing by the sideboard, arranging scones on a fine china plate, the blue willow pattern her mother had brought down from Yorkshire in 1962, wrapped in newspaper and hope. Eliza's movements were precise, almost ritualistic. She was a woman of 54, though her posture suggested a timelessness that defied age. She wore the dress dot. It was dove gray wool, tailored to a standard that no longer existed in the world of fast fashion. It had a high collar that grazed her jawline, elbow-length sleeves, and a bodice that fitted her with the familiarity of a second skin. Pinned at the throat was a single pearl brooch, its luster dimmed by decades of wear. The dress was faded in places, the gray softening into a dusty silver at the elbows. The hem had been mended twice, the stitches invisible to the untrained eye but glaringly obvious to Eliza. The buttons running down the back were bone. Sewn with double thread for a security dot, it was not a fashionable garment. It was a reliquary. "It is a gathering, Emily," Eliza said, her voice calm, possessing the resonant timbre of a cello. "Your friends are coming. We offer hospitality. That is what we do." "My friends are coming to pregame before we go to the club," Emily scoffed, crossing her arms. "They want vodka and maybe a Spotify playlist, not scones and whatever that is." She gestured vaguely at her mother's attire. Eliza smoothed the skirt of the gray dress. Her hands were weathered, the veins prominent. Strong hands that had gardened, cooked, and helped dying relatives. "This dress," Eliza said quietly, "was made for me by my mother 3 months before she died of ovarian cancer." She sat in a chair by the window, much like the one you were standing by, and she stitched it through the pain. "She told me, Eliza, wear it when you need to remember who you are." Emily rolled her eyes. She had heard the story 1,000 times. It had lost its potency, reduced to background noise, like the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Yeah, remember who you are," Emily mimicked, pitching her voice into a melodramatic wobble. "We know, Mom. We all know. You wore it to your wedding. You wore it to Dad's funeral. You wore it to my first day of school. You wore it to my graduation. It's practically a family member. It is honor, Eliza corrected gently. It is continuity. It's moth-eaten, Emily snapped. The doorbell rang. The sound shattered the tension. Or perhaps it just froze it in place. Emily brightened instantly, a mask of social vivacity sliding over her features. She checked her phone, smoothed her hair, and rushed to the hallway. Eliza stayed by the table. She touched the pearl brooch at her throat. She took a breath, centering herself. She was the lady of the house. She would behave as such. Chloe arrived first. She was a whirlwind of sensory overload, glittery eyeliner, an oversized designer coat that looked like it was made of teddy bear fur, and a voice that rang through the hall like a fire alarm. "Oh my God, Emily." Chloe shrieked, embracing her friend. She stepped into the hallway, shaking off a wet umbrella. Her eyes immediately landed on the interior of the house. "I love this place. It's so vintage. It gives me total dark academia vibes." Liam followed. He was quiet, dressed in a charcoal wool coat and dark jeans, his eyes intelligent and observant. He nodded to Emily, stepping aside to let Priya enter. Priya was the sharpest of the group, a business major with eyes that appraised everything like a potential asset acquisition. She wore a sharp blazer and sensible heels. "Thanks for having us, Em," Priya said. Come in, come in." Emily ushered them into the dining room. "Mom's made tea." She said the word tea with an apologetic grimace, as if confessing to a crime. The group shuffled into the dining room. The table was set perfectly. Silver teapot steaming. Scones warm. Clotted cream and strawberry jam in crystal dishes. Eliza stood at the head of the table. "Welcome," she said. "Mrs. Harrington," Liam said politely. "Thank you for having us." "Oh, wow," Chloe said, sliding into a chair. "This spread is cute, very British." They sat. The ritual began. Tea was poured. Scones were passed. For 20 minutes, the veneer of civilization held. The conversation drifted through the shallow waters of university gossip. TikTok trends, the new boutique opening in Clavering, and the disastrous lecture on macroeconomics they had all attended that morning. Eliza sat quietly, sipping her Earl Grey. She didn't try to insert herself into their world. She simply existed in her own, a steady anchor in the room. Then, during a lull in the chatter about a viral video, Eliza spoke. "I have been volunteering at the Heritage Trust," she said, her voice unhurried, offering a bridge to conversation. "We are cataloging women's garments from the 1970s to the 1990s. There is a beautiful collection of hand-sewn dresses, mostly from working-class mothers in the North." Liam looked interested. "That sounds fascinating. Fashion history is really social history, isn't it?" Eliza smiled at him, a genuine warmth reaching her eyes. "Exactly. Fabric tells the truth that history books often miss. One of the pieces, it is quite similar to this one." She glanced down at her gray wool dress, asterisk beside her. Emily let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. She dropped her scone onto her plate with a clatter. "Oh my God," Emily groaned. "Here we go." Chloe looked between them, sensing the drama, and like a shark sensing blood, smiling. "Wait, is that the same dress you wore last Christmas?" "I remember the brooch. It's unique." "It's the only dress she wears," Emily said, leaning forward. Her elbows on the table, a breach of etiquette Eliza had corrected 1,000 times. Emily's voice dripped with the kind of casual cruelty only 20-year-olds can wield against their parents. A scalpel made of familiarity. "Seriously, Mom," Emily continued, looking around the table to ensure she had an audience. "You still wear that thing? It looks like something my nan would wear to a funeral. Don't you have anything modern?" Something that doesn't make you look like you're waiting for the queen to knock. Silence slammed into the room. The teacup in Eliza's hand didn't tremble. The steam from the Earl Grey curled upward, slow and steady, dancing in the silence. Liam looked at his shoes, his face flushing with second-hand embarrassment. Priya set her cup down with deliberate care, her eyes darting from mother to daughter. Chloe's grin faded, realizing the joke wasn't landing. Emily didn't notice. She was too busy scrolling through her phone, waiting for the laugh. She felt powerful. She was the cool daughter, distancing herself from the eccentric mother. But then Eliza spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It didn't beg. It simply was. This dress, Eliza said, looking directly at Emily, was made by my mother while she was dying. She couldn't sit for more than 10 minutes at a time because the tumors were pressing on her spine. But she stitched it anyway. Emily froze, her thumb hovering over her screen. She said, Eliza continued, her voice filling the room, pushing back the shadows. Eliza, I want you to wear it when you feel lost, when you forget who you are, when the world tells you to change. Eliza looked at Emily, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with grief. I wore it to your father's funeral, Emily. I stood by his grave in the rain in this wool, and it was the only thing that kept me warm. I wore it when you were 7 and had that nightmare after the dog died, and you cried into this skirt for an hour. I wore it the day you left for university and didn't call for 3 weeks. I wore it every year on your birthday because I wanted you to know that no matter how far you went, I was still here, still waiting. Eliza paused. The rain tapped harder against the glass, a rhythmic applause. And today, Eliza said softly, you called it fabric. Emily scoffed, a defensive reflex. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but she doubled down. She couldn't lose face in front of her friends. It's just a dress, Mom, Emily muttered, avoiding eye contact. People don't live in the past anymore. It's weird. You're weird. Eliza stood. She didn't stand loudly. She didn't slam her hands on the table. She rose with a fluidity that commanded attention. She looked at the guests. Excuse me for a moment. She walked out of the dining room. Her heels clicked on the parquet floor of the hallway, past the coat rack, past the framed photo of Emily at 6, holding a dandelion and grinning with no teeth. The dining room was left in a suffocating vacuum. Dude, Liam whispered to Emily. That was ... heavy. She's so dramatic, Emily hissed, though her stomach was churning. She always makes everything about her trauma. I just said the dress was ugly. It is ugly. It's sentimental, Priya corrected quietly. There's a difference. Whatever, Emily snapped. Then the footsteps returned. Eliza walked back into the room. In her hand, she held something that Emily hadn't seen in 6 years. It was dark wood, polished smooth by time and handling, about 14 inches long. It was a paddle. It wasn't a weapon. It was an implement of order. It had belonged to Eliza's father, a headmaster, and it had sat on the top shelf of the linen closet, a silent deterrent that Emily had largely forgotten existed. Until now, Eliza didn't hide it. She held it at her side, resting against the folds of the gray dress. Emily froze. Her eyes went wide, fixing on the object. What the hell are you doing? Emily whispered. Eliza didn't answer. She simply walked to the head of the table. She placed the paddle on the polished mahogany surface. The sound of wood meeting wood clack was louder than a shout. Chloe's phone was out, hovering below the table edge. She didn't press record, stunned into paralysis. Eliza looked at Emily. Come with me, Eliza said. No, Emily laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. No, you can't be serious. Mom, I'm 20 years old. I'm not a child. Then stop acting like one, Eliza said. I can, and I will. You're crazy, Emily said, looking at her friends for backup. Guys, tell her she's crazy. Liam looked away. Priya stared at the tablecloth. They were guests in a house of old laws, and they knew instinctively that they had no jurisdiction here. You have insulted the memory of my mother and the house she helped pay for, Eliza said. You have mocked the symbol of my grief to entertain people who will forget your name in 5 years. You have behaved without dignity. Eliza extended her hand. Palm up, expectant. Come with me to the drawing room. I'm not doing this, Emily said, her voice shaking. I'm leaving. She started to stand up. Sit down, Eliza commanded. The voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. It was the voice of the matriarch. The voice that had run this house through death, financial crashes, and raising a child alone. Emily sat. She didn't mean to. Her body just obeyed the tone. You have a choice, Eliza said, her eyes locking onto Emily's. You can walk out that door. You can leave with your friends. But if you do, you leave this family. You leave the support, the tuition, the car, and the history. You become a stranger, Eliza paused. Or you can come into the drawing room, accept the consequences of your cruelty, and reset the balance. You can show me that you are woman enough to take responsibility. The room held its breath. Emily stared at her mother. She looked at the paddle on the table. She looked at Chloe, who was staring at Eliza with a mixture of horror and awe. She looked at Liam, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod, as if to say, You messed up. Emily felt the trap snap shut. But it wasn't just a trap. It was a lifeline. Deep down, beneath the layers of foundation and cynicism, Emily knew she had gone too far. She felt sick with it. She had mocked the dead. I can't, Emily whispered. Not with them here. You insulted me in front of them, Eliza said. You made them an audience to your arrogance. Now they will be witnesses to your correction. Eliza picked up the paddle. Stand up, Emily. Slowly, agonizingly, Emily pushed her chair back. The legs scraped against the floor. She stood up in her expensive black dress, her legs trembling in her boots. Eliza didn't grab her. She didn't drag her. She simply turned and walked toward the drawing room, the room with the velvet chaise lounge, the room where the rain was loudest against the bay window. Emily stood there for a second. She could run. She really could, but she didn't. Head bowed, cheeks burning with a fire that was spreading to her chest. Emily followed her mother. The three friends sat at the dining table, silent, listening to the footsteps move across the hall. They didn't leave. They couldn't. They were frozen by the sudden, violent intrusion of consequence into their consequence-free lives. In the drawing room, Eliza stood by the chaise lounge. It was an antique piece, upholstered in crushed blue velvet, faded but soft. Over the arm, Eliza said. Emily stood in the center of the room. The door was open. Her friends could see her from the dining room if they turned their heads. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Mom, please, Emily whispered, tears finally welling in her eyes. I'm sorry. I really am. Don't do this. Apologies after the fact are cheap, Emily, Eliza said. She pointed to the chaise. Assume the position. Emily looked at the paddle in Eliza's hand. It looked so solid, so real. I hate you, Emily hissed, a childish revert. I know, Eliza said calmly. You hate that I have boundaries. That will pass. Emily walked to the chaise. She lowered herself onto the velvet. She bent over the armrest, her stomach pressing against the fabric. Her feet stayed on the floor, her torso angled down. The position forced her hips up, presenting her backside to the room, to her mother, to the history she had mocked. Her black aligned dress rode up slightly. Lift it, Eliza ordered, Mom, dot, dot, dot. Lift the dress. Emily, or I will cut it off you. Emily's hand shook as she reached back. She grabbed the hem of the expensive black fabric and pulled it up to her waist. Underneath, she wore black lace panties, delicate, expensive, grown up. They looked fragile now. Panties down, Eliza said. To the knees. No, Emily sobbed. Please, that's too much. You stripped me of my dignity at the dinner table, Eliza said. You will be stripped of yours now, down. Asterisk Emily squeezed her eyes shut. She hooked her thumbs into the lace waistband. She pushed them down. The cool air of the drawing room hit her skin. She was bare, exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since she was a toddler. She was 20 years old. She was a sophisticated university student, and she was bent over a chaise lounge in her mother's drawing room, bare-bottomed, waiting to be spanked. Eliza stepped up behind her. She looked at her daughter's pale skin, trembling against the dark velvet. She felt no pleasure in this, only a heavy, grim duty. She had let Emily drift too far. She had let the modern world convince her that being a friend was better than being a mother. That ended today, Eliza placed her left hand on the small of Emily's back. The touch was warm, heavy, stabilizing. Stay down, Eliza whispered. She raised the paddle. The room was silent. The rain tapped the window. The grandfather clock ticked. Eliza didn't count out loud yet. She simply swung, THWACK. The sound was shocking, sharp, explosive. Ah! Emily gasped, her head jerking up, her heels kicking off the floor. The paddle had connected perfectly across the meat of her bottom. A bright red mark bloomed instantly on the pale skin. Eliza pushed Emily's back down again. Down, THWACK. The second one was harder. Oh, God. Emily cried out. The pain was searing. It wasn't a dull thud. It was a bite. Wood against flesh. Physics against arrogance. THWACK. 3, Eliza said. Her voice was calm as a winter river. Emily buried her face in the velvet armrest. She bit her lip to stop the scream, but the tears were flowing now. Hot, salty, unstoppable. This is for mocking grief, Eliza said. THWAKK. Oh, Mom, I'm sorry. This is for calling love outdated, Eliza said. THWXEK. The rhythm was set. It wasn't fast. It was deliberate. Eliza let the sting settle between strokes. She let Emily feel the heat building, spreading, consuming her entire awareness. In the dining room, Chloe put her hand over her mouth. Liam stared at the wall, his face pale. They could hear every strike, every gasp, every sob. It was the most real thing they had ever experienced. Back in the drawing room, Emily was unraveling. The cool, detached girl in the black dress was gone. In her place was a daughter who was learning, stroke by painful stroke, that she was not the center of the universe. This, Eliza said, raising the paddle higher, is for forgetting who you are. Thwack 6. Emily wailed. Please, it hurts. It's supposed to, Eliza said. Asterisk, she checked the skin. It was glowing a bright, angry crimson. Tears were streaming down Emily's face, ruining her smoky eye makeup, leaving black streaks on the blue velvet. Eliza wasn't done. Not yet. The insult had been deep. The correction had to match it. I'm going to spank you until you are sorry, Eliza said. Truly sorry. Not because you were caught, but because you hurt me. She adjusted her grip on the paddle. Count them, Emily. What? Emily sobbed. Count the strokes. If you miss one, we start over. Emily sobbed harder. This was the final dismantling of her ego. Ready? Eliza asked. HEK. 1. Emily choked out. Black. 2. The counting turned the punishment into a partnership. Emily had to participate in her own discipline. She had to acknowledge every blow dot THWACK double quote 3 dot dot. As the numbers climbed, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was no longer a scene of conflict. It was a ritual of purging. The arrogance was being beaten out, leaving behind something raw and honest. But the lesson wasn't over. And the hardest part, the reconciliation, was yet to come. Asterisk, the counting was the hardest part. Pain is a physical sensation. It travels from the nerve endings to the brain in a fraction of a second, registering as heat, as sting, as shock. But counting? Counting required the mind to stay present in the humiliation. It forced Emily to acknowledge the transaction occurring between her actions and her consequences. 3 dot dot. Emily choked out, her voice ragged. She was 20 years old, a legal adult who voted and drove and paid taxes on her part-time income. But in this room, draped over the velvet chaise like a wayward Victorian child, those accolades of adulthood dissolved. She was reduced to the sum of her behavior, and her behavior had been small, so she was being made to feel small. Eliza stood behind her, the paddle feeling heavy and righteous in her hand. She did not enjoy this. Her heart hammered against her ribs with a rhythm that matched the rain outside. Every strike sent a vibration up her own arm, a physical echo of the discipline she was dispensing. But she did not falter. To stop now would be to admit that the disrespect was acceptable. To stop now would be to leave the lesson unfinished. 4, Eliza prompted. She swung. THWACK. The sound was a sharp clap of thunder in the quiet room. It landed squarely on the upper curve of Emily's bottom, overlapping with the previous mark. 4. Emily gasped, her body jerking reflexively. Her fingers clawed at the velvet upholstery, seeking an anchor in the storm. Louder, Eliza instructed. I want to hear you own it. 4. Emily screamed, the tears flowing freely now, dripping off her chin and staining the dark fabric beneath her. Good, Eliza said softly. This is for the arrogance. This is for thinking you are above the history that made you. Thwack. 5. The heat was becoming unbearable. Emily's backside felt like it was radiating fire. The skin was tight, pulsing, alive with a stinging, throbbing sensation that made it impossible to think about anything else. The sophisticated university student, the girl who mocked her mother's dress to impress her friends, was gone. All that was left was a weeping daughter who just wanted her mother to stop. Mom, please, Emily sobbed, her voice breaking into a high, thin wail. I'm sorry. I get it. I swear, I get it. Eliza paused. The paddle hovered in the air. She looked down at her daughter. She saw the shaking shoulders. She saw the red, angry skin exposed to the cool air. She saw the utter dismantling of the ego. Do you? Eliza asked. Do you understand that my grief is not your punchline? Do you understand that this dress, this fabric, as you called it, is the only reason I was able to get out of bed the year your father died? Yes, Emily wept. Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I don't want your fear, Emily, Eliza said, lowering the paddle slightly but not putting it away. I want your respect. And I want you to know that there are lines in this family that you do not cross, no matter how old you get. I won't, Emily promised, her face buried in her arms. I won't ever again. Eliza looked at the count in her head. She had intended for 12. They were at 5. But the quality of the contrition matters more than the quantity of the stripes. She looked at the welts rising on her daughter's skin. They were severe. They would bruise. They would make sitting uncomfortable for days. They would be a physical reminder every time Emily moved, sat, or bathed. The message had been delivered. Get up, Eliza said. The command was quiet. Final. Emily didn't move immediately. She couldn't. Her body was heavy with the aftershocks of the pain and the immense emotional release. She lay there for another 10 seconds, just breathing, just existing in the reality of what had happened. Then, slowly, she pushed herself up. Her hands trembled violently as she reached back. She hissed as her fingers grazed her own skin, the tactile proof of the punishment. She pulled her panties up, the lace snagging slightly on the tender flesh. She smoothed her black dress down. She turned to face her mother. Emily's face was a ruin. Her mascara ran in dark rivers down her cheeks. Her lips were swollen from biting them. Her eyes were bloodshot. She looked stripped. Eliza stood tall, the paddle back at her side. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had just carried a heavy load up a steep hill. "Go to your room," Eliza said. "Stay there. I will speak to your friends. Mom, they're—" Emily started, looking toward the door, panic rising again. They heard everything. "Yes," Eliza said calmly. "They did. And perhaps they learned something too. Now go." Emily didn't argue. She couldn't face them anyway. She walked past her mother, staring at the floor. She moved into the hallway. As she passed the dining room, she didn't look in. She couldn't bear it. She sprinted for the stairs, the movement pulling at her sore bottom, forcing a fresh wave of tears to her eyes. She ran up the steps, her boots thudding softly, and disappeared onto the landing. Eliza stood alone in the hallway for a moment. She took a deep breath. She placed the paddle on the hallway table, next to a vase of white lilies. Then she smoothed her gray wool dress, touched the pearl brooch at her throat, and walked back into the dining room. The three friends were sitting exactly where she had left them. The tea was cold. The scones were untouched. Chloe was pale, her phone face down on the table. Liam was staring out the window at the rain. Priya looked up as Eliza entered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and respect. "The gathering is over," Eliza said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her presence filled the room. Chloe stood up immediately, her chair scraping loudly. We should go. Yeah, we should go." "Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Harrington," Liam mumbled, standing up and buttoning his coat with fumbling fingers. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Goodbye," Eliza said. She didn't show them out. She stood by the table and watched them leave. They moved quickly, huddled together like sheep sensing a wolf. They grabbed their coats from the rack in the hall. The front door opened, letting in a gust of wet, cold wind, and then clicked shut. Silence reclaimed the house. It was a heavy silence, but it was clean. The superficiality had been swept out. Eliza walked to the window. She watched the three figures hurry down the street, heads down against the rain. They would talk about this, she knew. They would call her crazy. They would call her abusive. They would tell stories about the psycho mom in the Georgian townhouse. Eliza didn't care. Let them talk. They were tourists in her life. Emily was the resident, and Emily had to be saved. Scene transition, upstairs, the room was dark. Emily hadn't turned on the lights. She lay on her stomach on top of her duvet, still in her dress. Though she had kicked off her boots, the pain was a constant, throbbing companion. It radiated from her middle, a heat that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. Every time she shifted, the friction of the fabric against her skin sent a fresh spike of sting through her nerves, but the physical pain was manageable. It was the shame that was drowning her. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it. Her movement slow and stiff. Chloe, text. "Bro, that was insane. Are you alive? We left." "She's terrifying." Chloe, text. "Call me when you can escape." Emily stared at the screen. Escape. As if she were a prisoner. As if Eliza was a villain. For the first time in years, Emily looked at Chloe's words and didn't see a friend. She saw an instigator. She saw someone who had laughed when Emily mopped the dress. Someone who had encouraged the cruelty because it was content, because it was funny. Emily typed back, "I'm fine. Don't come back." Then she turned the phone off. She rolled onto her side, wincing. She looked at the wardrobe in the corner of her room. Inside hung her clothes, fast fashion, trendy pieces, things she bought to fit in. She thought about her mother's dress. The gray wool. The stitches made by a dying grandmother. "I wore it when you were 7 and had that nightmare. Emily closed her eyes. The memory surfaced. She was 7. The dog Barnaby had died. She had woken up screaming, convinced the shadows were eating her. Eliza had come running. She hadn't put on a robe. She was still fully dressed in that gray wool dress because she had been up late paying bills. She had scooped Emily up. Emily remembered the texture of the wool against her cheek. It was scratchy, but it was warm. It smelled of lavender and safety. She had cried into that shoulder for an hour, and Eliza had just held her, rocking back and forth, absorbing the grief. I called it fabric, Emily thought. I called it a costume. Fresh tears leaked from her eyes, sliding over the bridge of her nose to wet the pillow. She had tried to be cool. She had tried to be modern. And in doing so, she had become something ugly. She deserved the paddle. She realized that now. It wasn't about the dress. It was about the betrayal of the woman who had held her when she couldn't hold herself. Emily lay in the dark for hours. She didn't go down for dinner. She heard Eliza moving around downstairs, the clinking of china, the running of water, the sounds of a home being maintained by one person. Eventually, exhaustion overtook the pain, and she drifted into a fitful, restless sleep. The next morning, the sun did not shine. It was Bath, after all. The sky was a lighter shade of gray, the rain reduced to a mist. Emily woke up stiff. Her backside was tender, the skin tight. Sitting up required a careful negotiation with gravity. She groaned, rubbing her face. She felt hungover, though she hadn't touched a drop of alcohol. It was an emotional hangover. She showered, the hot water stinging her welts, a fresh reminder of the day before. She dried herself gingerly. In the mirror, she looked at the marks. They were angry, purple and red stripes crisscrossing her pale skin. They looked brutal, but strangely, they didn't look like abuse. They looked like a receipt, a payment for a debt incurred. She dressed in loose sweatpants and a soft white sweater. No makeup, no ponytail. Just her, stripped of the armor. She walked downstairs. The kitchen smelled of toast and coffee. Eliza was standing at the sink, wearing a crisp white blouse and dark trousers. The gray dress was gone, returned to the wardrobe. "Morning," Emily said. Her voice was small, rusty. Eliza turned. Her face was neutral. "There is toast. And coffee." "I'm not hungry," Emily said. She walked into the room but didn't sit. She stood near the island, gripping the cool granite edge. "I wanted to say," Emily started, then stopped. She took a breath. "I'm sorry isn't enough." "I know that." Eliza dried her hands on a towel. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. She waited. "I was trying to show off," Emily admitted. "Chloe and Liam, they have these parents who are cool, who wear designer clothes and go to Ibiza, and I felt, I don't know, embarrassed. Because you're real. You're serious. And that made me feel insecure. So I attacked you to make myself look bigger." She looked up at her mother. "It was pathetic. And I hurt you. And I mocked Grandma. And I'm so shamed." Eliza looked at her daughter. She saw the sincerity. She saw the lack of defense. "You were cruel," Eliza said plainly. "Cruelty is a choice, Emily. It is a muscle. If you exercise it, it gets stronger. Yesterday, I had to break that muscle before it became a permanent part of who you are." "I know," Emily whispered. The dress, Eliza said, looking out the window at the garden, is not just a dress. It is a timeline. It proves that I was loved, and it proves that I loved you. When you mocked it, you didn't just mock the wool. You mocked the love. I know, Emily repeated, a tear slipping down her cheek. I want to fix it. Tell me how to fix it. Eliza looked back at her. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a hug yet. Actions, Eliza said. Words are wind. Show me you understand. How? But that is for you to figure out, Eliza said. You are an adult. Figure it out. She turned back to the sink. The conversation was over. The forgiveness was conditional. Emily stood there for a moment. Then she nodded to herself. She turned and walked out of the kitchen. She grabbed her keys from the hall table. I'm going out, Emily called out. Be back for dinner, Eliza replied. Not asking where she was going. Emily was gone for 6 hours. She drove into the city center. She parked the car. She walked through the wet streets, ignoring the ache in her legs and the sting of her bottom against the denim of her jeans, which she had changed into before leaving. Needing to look presentable, she went to 3 different fabric shops. She argued with a tailor on Milsom Street. She made phone calls. She cashed out her savings account, the money she was saving for a trip to Greece with Chloe. She didn't care about Greece. She cared about the gray dress. She returned home at 4 p.m. The house was quiet. Eliza was in the drawing room, reading a book. She looked up as Emily walked in. Emily was holding a large, white box tied with a satin ribbon. Her hair was frizzy from the damp air, her cheeks flushed. She walked over to the coffee table and placed the box down. For you, Emily said. Eliza put her book down. She looked at the box, then at Emily. What is this? Open it. Eliza reached forward. Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she pulled the ribbon. It fell away. She lifted the lid. She gasped. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was a dress. It was dove gray wool. It had a high collar. It had elbow-length sleeves. It was the dress, but it wasn't the dress. This fabric was new, plush, untouched by time. The color was rich, a deep, stormy gray that caught the light. The stitching was immaculate, precise, mimicking the pattern of the original perfectly, and pinned to the collar was a small, silver brooch in the shape of a dove. Eliza ran her hand over the wool. It was soft, luxurious. I found a seamstress, Emily said, her voice tumbling out fast. In the artisan quarter. She specializes in vintage restoration. I took a picture of your dress, the one from the photo album. I told her I needed it today. I paid her double. She worked on it for 5 hours straight while I watched. Eliza looked up, her eyes shining. Why? Because, Emily said, her voice shaking. You shouldn't have to wear the old one to feel close to Grandma. The old one? It's tired, Mom. It's done its job. It protected you. But it's falling apart. Emily stepped closer. I wanted you to have a new one. So you can keep carrying the memory, but without the holes. I want you to wear this one. And I want you to know that I see you. I see the history. And I honor it. Eliza stood up. She lifted the dress from the box. It unfolded like a gray cloud. She held it against herself. It was perfect. And Emily added, pulling a small card from her pocket. I called the Heritage Trust the place you volunteer. Eliza froze. You did what? I spoke to the curator, Mrs. Gable. I told her about Grandma's dress. The real one. I told her the story. About the stitching while she was dying. About the ovarian cancer. About how you've worn it for 30 years. Emily took a deep breath. They want it, Mom. They want to put it in the exhibit. The stitch of survival. They want to display it next week. It won't be in a closet anymore. It will be in a glass case with her name on it. And yours. Eliza stared at her daughter. The silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was golden. The paddle, the pain, the shouting. It had all been a storm to clear the air for this. Eliza dropped the new dress onto the sofa. She stepped forward and pulled Emily into a hug. It wasn't a polite hug. It was fierce. She squeezed Emily tight, pressing her face into Emily's shoulder. Emily flinched slightly as Eliza's arm pressed against her sore back, but she didn't pull away. She wrapped her arms around her mother and held on. "Thank you," Eliza whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Thank you, my darling." "I love you, Mom," Emily cried. "I'm so sorry." "I know," Eliza said. "I know." 2 weeks later, the Bath Fashion Museum was quiet. The air conditioned and smelling of old paper and preservation chemicals. Eliza stood before a glass display case. She was wearing the new gray dress. It fit her perfectly, the silver dove brooch gleaming under the museum lights. She looked regal, modern yet timeless. Inside the case, on a mannequin, was the old dress. Under the lights, you could see the flaws. The mending, the faded elbows, the strain on the seams. But you could also see the love. You could see the tiny, uneven stitches at the hem where a dying woman's hands had, shaken but refused to stop. A small placard sat at the base of the display. The Stitch of Survival, 1993, hand-sewn wool. Maker, Margaret Holla. Donated by her granddaughter, Eliza Harrington. A garment is not just fabric. It is a memory you can wear. Emily stood beside her mother. She was wearing a simple navy dress, modest, elegant. Her hand was resting on Eliza's arm. "It looks beautiful," Emily said softly. "It looks tired," Eliza smiled, but it was a smile of peace. "It looks like it can finally rest." Eliza turned to Emily. She reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "You did good?" I had a good teacher," Emily replied. They stood there for a moment longer, two women reflected in the glass. The old dress between them, no longer a point of contention, but a bridge. "Come on," Eliza said, linking her arm through Emily's. "Let's go get tea." "Real tea. With scones. Only if I can wear the hat," Emily joked weakly. "Don't push your luck." Eliza laughed. They walked away from the exhibit, their heels clicking in unison on the polished floor, leaving the past in the glass case and walking into the future together.